Oh, look, one of the things that I'm deeply unhappy about is that my taxpayers' dollars and your taxpayers' dollars has contributed to where we've landed. It's absolutely outrageous that money allocated to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency has resulted in books teaching arithmetic to Arab youth. If you've got 2 dead Jews and you kill 2 more Jews, how many dead Jews do you have? You've got 4 dead Jews, teacher. That is something that has been common knowledge for 15 or 20 years. That has resulted in the level of fanaticism. And I've got a real problem with my taxpayers' money, and indeed the money from democracies, Western liberal democracies, going into United Nations and funding that level of fanaticism. It's outrageous.
How much did the UN peace mission over there, while you were over there, know about those specific things, and how much could the UN peace mission do to change that?
Yeah, so look, that example I knew in Australia because I keep updated on events. My role as the head of military for the United Nations True Supervision Organisation for a period of 27 months, we were under the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations. There's a separate UN body, Department of Political Affairs, the UN Special Coordinator and Relief and Works Agency. UN is a whopping great big bureaucracy. You have to take a seat before you look at the wire diagram because it'll blow your mind. We were completely unrelated. We had no responsibilities in Gaza or Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. I personally am having trouble referring to the West Bank by that name. My tipping point was the BBAS murders and the spectacle. I formerly believed in the two-state solution, but when I hear from friends of mine in Israel, including on the political left, saying that it's just not possible for decades, I think there's something in that. But coming back to the specific question at hand, the UN True Supervision Organisation, we were there to observe and monitor and report the terms of the ceasefire agreements. I was headquartered in Jerusalem. I had officers that lived in Tiberias that would work up in the Golan, work in Syria in Kenedra, work in southern Lebanon in the Litani sector, north of the Blue Line.
So if you're talking the Litani section, I mean, was there much spoken about when it comes to the tunnels that have been found there?
There were some structural challenges. I'm apolitical, and I took my job as the head of military very seriously.
No, of course, I'm not.
But let me tease out. So, unfortunately, the realities in this world are that there's people, nation states that benefit from the dynamic. If it doesn't involve the Jews, it's not going to hit the news. And so, United Nations resolutions are established by the Security Council, comprising 5 permanent members. That is America, the UK, France, Russia and China, and then a further 10 people that rotate. Those 5 permanent members have got veto powers. And so United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 that related to Lebanon and Hezbollah, that was signed into effect after the 2006 Lebanon war. If you think of the parties in power at that time, it was the Bush II presidency who was passionate supporter of the State of Israel. But when you're looking at a resolution, they could come up with a hairy-chested resolution, but if it didn't meet the expectations of China and Russia, it wasn't going to fly. And at the tactical level, an incongruity I found, having already served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and being a cavalry officer, it was just a nonsense that we, observing and monitoring and reporting, couldn't enter private property. And indeed, we're in a position as peacekeepers, my team were unarmed, but the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, I heard a story a couple of months before I arrived in the mission where an armoured column of armed troops made a navigational area through one of the population centres in southern Lebanon, veered onto a path where non-combatants, Hezbollah, didn't want them to go. There was an illegal checkpoint that was established at the front and back of the column. Some of the peacekeepers were roughed up and they had their weapons taken off them. It's like, how could that be? Because I'd already served a couple of combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. If someone were to try and attempt to deprive me of my weapon, I could escalate up to and including, if necessary, lethal force. But the rules of engagement and the operating parameters didn't allow those peacekeepers to even stop someone from seizing their weapon. It get back to unfortunately the political reality that if the world's attention is all focused on Israel and the challenges, well, where they're not looking at is Eastern Europe, and they're not looking at the South China Sea and other places.
Yeah. So there's that diversion factor that comes into play that stops the United Nations mission from being able to do what so many of you want to be doing.
So look, I personally, my wants and desires are completely
of course.
And so as a professional soldier, I implement the mission and mandate. And while I was while I was an Australian Army officer, seconded to the United Nations, I was strictly neutral. I had my mission and my mandate, and indeed, I would demand certain behaviour and performance from all of the 153 officers drawn from 27 different troop contributing countries, like America, like Russia, like China, and a number of other troop contributing countries. We weren't there to have opinions. We were there to do the job of the soldiers. And personally, I look back on that time where I'm very proud of what I was able to achieve. I was very individually and collectively. It was through COVID. It was through a number of strategically significant actions, such as the large bomb blast in Beirut on the 4th of August 2020, Syria crisis that only ended, with HTS Sunni terrorists coming to power in Syria, and what felt at the time like we might have tipped into the third intifada. It was the instability leading up to the Abraham Accords, and of course the May 2021 Gaza war. I can certainly empathise and relate with Israelis. I've served in war zones. Things that go boom are not unfamiliar to me. But living in Jerusalem and looking across to my wife and saying, "Hey, sweetheart, they aren't fireworks, they're rockets. Let's go into the safe room." That's something that people in the United Kingdom, America, Australia, the West, they can't empathise and relate with. They cannot imagine what it is to live in a place like Tel Aviv, similar to San Francisco or Sydney, and to have an hour's drive south, bloodthirsty psychopaths and sociopaths that unfortunately have been radicalised by our taxpayers' money.